Welcome back to the Drummer Mindset Podcast. I'm Joel Pereira. Today I'm releasing my episode with Jamie Douglas. Jamie is a drummer based in Los Angeles. He is currently on tour with Samantha Fish and Jesse Dayton. You can also check out work that he's done with Shooter Jennings. And then also you can actually see him tonight, if you catch this when the episode releases, on January 9th, 2024 on Jimmy Kimmel Live with Duff McKagan. Check the show notes or the links in my bio for more of his content. I was really fortunate to be able to catch him while he was on tour with Samantha Fish, and they came through Asheville. Unfortunately, that show was canceled because of a fire suppression system malfunction. So hopefully they'll be able to come back through because they are just a ripping band to catch. So much energy, and just everyone plays so well. Just real pros. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. Don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, follow, leave me a review. Let me know what you think. Maybe you have a drummer in mind that you'd like to see on the show. But otherwise, take care. Well, man, thanks so much for joining me here.
Thank you, Joel.
I know you're busy. I mean, y'all have been on you were just saying, I mean, you've already done 100 dates or so. Is that right?
Thereabouts, maybe a few more than 100 in the last 7 months, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
And I mean, you're no stranger to this. Like, you've done tours before with other bands.
I have done tours before, although during the sort of COVID times, 2020, 21, 22, I was mostly at home recording, teaching, doing that kind of thing.
Yeah.
When all of that came to a halt. But prior to that, I was out touring with Shooter Jennings and Duff McKagan for a few years.
Oh, right.
So although those bands weren't out quite as frequently as Samantha and Jesse's band is, so this level, this kind of density of this many shows is new for me.
Okay.
And it's been a thrill and a lot of fun, and also a new challenge in a way to adapt to that kind of level of touring, that intensity of a road show. You know?
Yeah. How have you adapted?
Well, it's funny. Maybe this is a roundabout way of answering that question, but when I was able to go home for a couple of weeks for Thanksgiving, I found that I could go back and look at the music again in a fresh way and kind of woodshed again a little bit, as if I was new to it again in a way that was really refreshing, because I realized that being out there playing this many shows and just dealing with the day-to-day of touring, I didn't really have a lot of time to reflect on how I could develop my parts, how I could improve and grow in the situation. I was definitely studying video, studying tape of our shows. I mean, I was paying attention to things like, is this tempo good? Are these parts more or less accurate?
Right.
Are things gelling? Things like that. But then, but I wasn't able to think as creatively in terms of really developing the parts, taking the whole thing from my point of view to the next level. So going home and just having a couple of weeks to do that was amazing. And now I feel like I'm able to develop things, like I said, a little bit more than I did before. So I guess like that, I was long way of saying I was surprised at how hard it is to stay really creative when you're playing this many shows.
Right.
'Cause it's just about executing them well.
Right. Yeah, because it's a tight band. I mean, you have your jams and stuff, right? But it is, I mean, the songs are very specific, and they have a direction. So
absolutely, the arrangements are awesome.
Mm-hmm.
This Death Wish record that we're doing with Samantha and Jesse is very cool, because it's got a lot of really well spelled out back and forth parts going on between Sam and Jesse, and kind of call and response patterns in the rhythm section, which is super fun. Gives us a lot of sort of marks to jump off of. When we played Samantha's show doing the Love Letters tour, it was a little different, because that had a little bit more extended improvisational parts.
Okay.
So that was a lot of fun to do as well. And that was something where I really had to put a lot of thought into, we're going to build this thing for the next few minutes, not just a few bars, which was fun.
Yeah. And that's something you've been playing since you were a kid. And for a few decades anyway, right? I think I read that.
That's true. I started in 1986.
Okay.
I was in 5th grade.
Okay. Gotcha. So then, at this point in your drumming, technique, I mean, are there skills that you're still obtaining, or do you feel like you're just developing skills that you've had?
That's a great question. I'm still trying to attain certain skills. There's certain things that have been lifelong goals of mine to work on. And I'm just able to kind of start doing that now. There's other things that I sort of procrastinated for a long time. And of course, there's refining around the edges of certain things like dynamics and touch and timekeeping.
What'd you procrastinate on?
Just certain. I think the thing I procrastinate the most on would be solos.
Okay. Yeah.
I listen to a drummer play an amazing solo and I think, wow, that's really cool. And then I don't always actually dig in and work on it.
Right.
And so then when I do start doing it, it's so fun and it's so rewarding. And, but it's not necessarily what the people I'm playing with are asking of me.
Right.
You know, I'm here to play songs and arrangements. And so I a lot of times my focus gets so shifted on shifted towards that, it just takes a little bit of a shift to get back into that thing that is totally unfamiliar and not necessarily what people are hiring me to do.
Right.
So I've sort of procrastinated that stuff. That's the thing where you have to carve out time for, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I go to a couple of different open jams in town. And so there's like a blues kind of guitar jam that I go to. And then there's like an open funk jam that I go to. And so, but the two, I mean, the one guitar bar, it's a small room, the acoustics, I mean, it's kind of like this, but there's tons of people in there. And so like, if you're not careful, the drums can really, reverberate and just stay in the room for a long period of time. So they deaden everything. So like the drum set is good for blues, but it's pretty much a dead thud, and typically you tell them, well, I'm more of a pocket drummer. Oh, that's good. Yeah, we don't want any solos, but then you go to the funk jam and it's like, let's give the drummer sub. And it's like, oh gosh, yeah, I got to do that again. So yeah, I've been kind of like working back on that a little bit. The improvisation piece is like just nothing I ever practiced as much, that pure improv kind of a thing. So I'm trying to do that stuff now. But like you said, like you get some opportunity, but it's not much.
Well, I mean, there's a couple moments in this show where I do get to cut loose, which is fun. There's this tune we do called 7 by 7 by Love, where it's like kind of a surf rock kind of soloistic thing on the drums, which is really fun. And then doing the Sam show, when we're playing these jams that kind of build, then I can open up a little bit more, play more sort of adventurous fills and things. The last few years, the work I've been doing has been with a lot of Americana artists, a lot of country artists, a lot of pretty straight rock stuff,
right?
Where it's like the solos and the drum parts are really built around the song arrangement,
right?
So it's not so much about chopping up, playing a lot of notes or even extending stuff for very long. So that's why this gig has been really fun to get back into a little bit more of an improvisational, slow burn kind of guitar solo concept, which I love. I grew up playing that stuff.
Yeah.
So.
And that Shooter gig, though, I mean, just listening to some of the latest albums and stuff like that, I mean, it is varied. There's a lot of variation. It seems like it probably would have been a lot of, I don't know, interesting to record.
Yeah. I love working with Shooter. He's one of my favorite people on the planet. Absolutely terrific producer. We've made a bunch of records together, and then I've also gotten to travel and play his music, and with his band backing other artists, like when his band became Duff McKagan's band back in 2019, and and when we played with Yellow Wolf and Sometimes Why, 2020 to 21, I guess it was, or 22. That's been an incredible collaboration.
Yeah,
and he's just phenomenal. He's awesome.
Yeah. You can tell like he is interested in a lot, and he hones it. And the sound is there. Like it's But I would imagine. So, as a drummer, I always think about the different styles of music that we learn is almost kind of like the different scales that a guitarist might learn, right? Or something like it's just that's what we are told to do. And that's what we're taught, and it's fun and it's interesting, right? But then, and I think in an interview that I read about you said, you had a niche down at some point. Like, did you say that? Did you have like some feeling?
Yes. Yes. This was an idea about how sometimes if we're so diversified in the numbers of styles that we're trying to study at any one time. Let me back up. I don't want to speak for other drummers because I don't know if there really is a limit per se on how much we should try to do. In my case, when I was first in Los Angeles, first kind of doing this stuff, trying to get gigs, trying to get sessions, things like that, I was just chasing every little interest I had musically. And that also was at a time when I hadn't exactly found my community yet, musically speaking. I hadn't really quite found my niche. I was playing in a bunch of different bands, but they were all kind of disconnected from each other. There wasn't a feeling of a real community between them. And that wasn't anybody's fault. That was just the luck of how it worked out with the people I met when I moved to town. It wasn't until about maybe 10 years in, really, that I started to not only find a little more of a scene, but then I also found that the styles started to coalesce around that scene. Like the number of styles that I was being asked to do within that scene was narrowing. And so then I realized, okay, I can study this. I can feel really confident putting more of my study time into it. Because I know that this is a thing that is validated by my peers and these people that I love and I look up to. And I'm rewarded for doing it because I'm getting fun gigs that I want to do. You know? So I guess in my own case, it was just the idea that if I don't want to be, well, I mean, it's such a tricky thing though, because like I said, then I'll come home from tour and I'll want to sometimes grab the most obscure and random style I can just because it keeps things fresh. So again, I don't know if there's really like a rule on this per se, but I think we do have to watch that. We have to know when to focus stylistically to have our own identity and have a, because that just seems to be the way the music community works a lot, is that a lot of the same people run together within somewhat genre bound, not completely, but it just happens that way. You get referred to other things that are similar to the thing you were just doing.
Right.
That does seem to happen a lot, and that's good and bad.
Yeah, that's what my limited experience has been, you know, as I've been like, you know, kind of looking for the same thing, kind of like, you know, finding the different genres and the different kind of groups that are going on. And Asheville is like surprisingly just dense with talent. A lot of folks live here. There's always new venues that are popping up and new businesses and stuff. So gigs are pumping out. I mean, it's like a dilemma every, like today it's not a dilemma because I'm going to see Samantha Fish and I'd planned on it. It is great. But like, there's so many other great bands that are playing tonight too, and tomorrow. And like, and every musician I've talked to has been like, it's been a crazy and weird holiday season. Like just so many gigs.
That's awesome.
And it's great. It's a great problem to have, but it's just interesting because when I meet someone and they're like, "Are you a musician?" And it's like, "Well, yeah, I play the drums," you know. And they're like, "Okay, well, what's your style?" You know, and I'm like, "What do you need?" You know, but no one really wants to hear that. It seems to me. If you like people, it seems like are looking for their niche, you know.
This was so hard for me when I first moved to LA because I literally knew nobody. So I was looking up stuff in classified ads basically at that time. And it would be like, we're looking for someone who's into this band, and this band. And I was exactly like you said. I'm thinking, but that doesn't describe me at all. Like, I'm, you know, I love those bands, but I also love all this other stuff. Maybe I just wasn't diplomatic enough to just say, "Yep, I love those bands. Let me play with you guys." Like, you know, I didn't have the T-shirt or something. You know?
Right.
But yeah, it's funny how that works sometimes.
And you also, it's funny too, like because you said it was about 10 years for you, and you always hear that like Nashville is supposed to be like a 10-year town. You hear those kinds of things, and it was true for you.
It was true for me. I was also teaching a lot, and I was not pursuing things maybe quite as aggressively as some of my peers. There were definitely people that who sort of developed faster. They developed their career faster than me. But that was also because I was moving to a brand new place. I was really just wanted to set up a stable turf. I mean, I still live there. It's my home. I'm raising my family there. So there was a certain amount of just trying to earn some money so that I could make it last. And sometimes teaching was the better way to do it. So there were gigs that I didn't always chase because I was doing that. So that was part of the reason why it took a minute for me. I also just needed some time to grow up. I think I was still pretty young when I got out there, you know.
Yeah, but it sounds like you had already completed college and stuff.
Yes,
and then,
I had a degree in psychology from Indiana University.
Okay.
And I'd studied quite a bit of music there as well. That was the end of my time there. That was really all I was focusing on, because I knew that's what I wanted to do at that point. So. Yeah.
And you studied the psychology because you knew like it would be important for teaching, or
Well, not exactly. I was actually
human behavior never really goes out of style. Right?
That's true. I was really fascinated by the mind and people and stuff. And I was pre-med for my first couple of years in college, so I was taking a lot of science classes, and psychology seemed like an interesting branch. I thought that maybe I could go into something related to psychiatry or neuroscience or something, because that was what I was studying at that time. But then after a few years, it became pretty clear that there was a fork in the road approaching, and I wanted to give the music thing a go. So, so then after that, the great thing was that basically as soon as I got to LA, a friend of mine said, "Hey, maybe you should think about tutoring. I heard of this company that's looking for tutors." And I remember thinking, "Oh, that's interesting," So I was able to still utilize the degree and a lot of what I'd picked up studying psychology, which a lot of it was built around learning. I mean, I studied quite a lot of behavioral psych and the neurobiology of learning. So like that paid off in teaching in terms of structuring lesson plans and things like that.
Do you teach drums as well?
I do, not as much. I have a few students that I meet with in Los Angeles. I'm not really pushing drum lessons at this time, but when people come to me, I'm happy to work with them. I primarily just teaching math to high school and college kids these days, and some middle school.
How is it different, like something that's so technical and kinetic versus something cognitive or cerebral for you?
Great question.
Because you're a math teacher, primarily, is that right?
I am. To me, sorry, it's just so hard to even know where to jump in. I guess I see music and math as really closely connected in the sense of sets of structures that get really good results. Self-consistent sets of structures. For whatever reason, I really enjoy that element of both music and math, the structural element. You're right that the music is more kinetic and more like at least for the spectator, more emotional, more we get more of a kind of a feel off of it. But as a teacher and a person working on math, I've discovered that a lot of those same feelings and those same, maybe not the movements, it's not, and the spectator element may not be there, but they're surprisingly similar in terms of the way ideas will click, the way patterns fall together to create something bigger and more interesting. To me, they're not that different, which again, is hard to explain sometimes, or people don't really buy it. They're kind of like, oh, okay, but I like it. I like switching back and forth. It's really good for the brain. I think it's, to me, it makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And it's fun. I enjoy it too. I really do enjoy working on math with people.
Math they are so similar. And so there is a component of that anyway, the cerebral aspect, like kind of looking through. What in your experience as a teacher have you ingrained for yourself in how you might learn new drums?
I think the way that being a teacher has helped with studying drums and learning parts is to take it slowly, number one, to take it incrementally, maybe break it into small little pieces that can be individually approached before we try to put it all together, maybe stretch it out over a period of a few months.
Right.
That's incredibly valuable if you can do it.
Yeah.
Because I think the best kind of training occurs over these longer periods of time, not only in terms of developing the skill itself, but also kind of building the culture around what you're trying to do. In music, like really understanding a genre, for example,
right.
Or in math, or in any academic thing, like developing the study habits, let's say, or just approaches of note-taking or drilling or whatever it is that happens to work for each of us, which is different for each of us.
Right.
So yeah, I do like to approach my drum studies with something like I do with my math students if I was teaching in the classroom, and I was trying to build a curriculum for the fall, let's say, I don't do it quite that strictly. I'm not writing out a long, detailed lesson plan when I'm working on these things, but I do try to take it one piece at a time, and I try to repeat it over a period of weeks, let's say, if possible.
A lot of breaks is what I'm finding too.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
It's like little rest breaks and then sleep and all those kinds of things.
Absolutely.
How's sleep on the road?
It varies. We're not flying that much this tour, which is really nice. Sometimes we'll be on the bus and then we're flying somewhere and then flying back, and then that's tough because you're inevitably waking up really early to go to the airport or something like that.
Right.
That can be a little challenging. It's fun to go to all these places, so it pays off, but that can be a little tough. Sometimes the buses are, it's hit or miss sleeping on the bus. Sometimes it's the best sleep I've ever had.
Right.
Sometimes I'm up for a while. I mean, I'm doing my best.
Right.
I'm definitely sleeping later and staying up later than I normally do.
Yeah.
I
bet. But I mean, do you gig much when you're back in LA as far as like picking up gigs here and there?
Because I'm gone so much, I only do a few these days, like things that I really want to do. Ordinarily, yeah. Well, like before I joined Samantha and Jesse's band, I was playing with lots of people in LA. But once you're gone for a while, you're not available, so then they'll end up using other people for certain projects. And also, sometimes when I'm home, I would just rather be home with my family, or sometimes even just go out and see my friends' bands is just as every bit as rewarding.
Yeah,
talking to the cats again.
Yeah.
So I don't do a ton at home these days, but I'm doing a few. Yeah.
Cool. You said there was a fork in the road as far as like pre-med, psychology, that kind of stuff, and the music.
Yeah.
But then the teaching thing too, like I mean, it's not a side hustle.
There was a fork in the road with that too.
Okay.
Most definitely. Over my time in LA, I started off as just a tutor, and then I gradually started doing more and more classroom teaching. I eventually got a job teaching at a really good school in Hollywood called the Episcopal School of Los Angeles, and I was actually the math department chair there for a couple of years. Now, this coincided with when I was playing with Shooter, and that band started to tour more and more.
Right.
So eventually that just became untenable. I had been a tutor for so many years. I think I belatedly sort of realized the importance of, if you're going to be in a school, teaching in a school,
right,
you've got to show your face every day.
Yeah.
You cannot be subbing out.
Yeah.
I mean, I was subbing out classes in an effective manner, don't get me wrong. And I was teaching remotely while I was on tour effectively. But I totally underestimated the needing to show your face, this role that good teachers play for their students, which is consistent, there every day, like almost like a parental figure in a way.
Rapport, you have to put the time in with kids.
That's right.
And like you're saying, that consistency is so key.
Yes.
And so, yeah.
So once that was not, and I chose music because I love teaching, and I even spoke with some mentors of mine in the teaching world around that time, like, this is a tough choice I'm making. And the thing that a few of them said was that this is always going to be here for you.
Yeah.
This teaching thing.
Yeah.
This opportunity to tour is a unique one.
Yeah.
I would hate for that to be a selfish choice. I don't really think it is. My family supports what I'm doing. But it's tough because teaching really is incredibly rewarding, if done well.
Yeah.
With interesting people. So that was a little tough. Like when that next fall rolled around, and the cold winds started blowing of autumn time, and I wasn't teaching, that felt weird. It felt really weird. Even though I was doing it for a really exciting reason, which was to play music, which is what I've always wanted to do.
Do you have mentors in the music space?
I would say I have to say it, and I don't care. I'll say it to his face. My number one mentor these days is Duff McKagan.
Okay.
In music, I don't know if mentor is the right word, more like role model.
Okay.
That's a person I really look up to a lot. I've gotten to work with him a lot. He's maybe the most grounded, self-aware person I know.
Wow.
In or out of music.
That's kind of incredible, right?
Especially being in rock in one of the biggest bands of all time.
Absolutely. And kind of the unspoken band leader is always how I learned about Duff, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know.
I would agree. I mean, So that's somebody who I can, and a cool thing too is that he's got 2 daughters who are in their 20s now, and my daughter's 21, and not very many of my friends have kids that age. So I've been able to talk with him a bit about being a parent of older kids, which has been really, really interesting, and just the down to earth manner in which he treats everyone around him, and I'm very, very impressed with Duff.
Yeah.
And there's so many others. There's so many other musicians who inspire me, but in terms of just the whole person, I would have to say he's really a legend.
Awesome.
And I'm biased because when I was a kid, I was a complete Guns N' Roses fanatic.
Of course.
I had 2 different posters with the guy. When I was a kid, and
Of course.
Now we're hanging out.
That's got to be surreal.
It's really cool. I mean, it's just one of the fun things about being in this business. But I mean, there's just so many. I mean, I learned from all my bandmates. I really try to listen more than I talk. Present context accepted. So I yeah. And it's funny because when we study records, a lot of times we don't really learn that much about the people who made them. It's more about what they mean to us because of the music itself.
Right.
So it's fun when the curtain gets pulled and you're actually spending time with great musicians as people rather than just approaching their work.
Yeah. Yeah. I imagine, especially if you're kind of in a supporting role as the drummer is, like really knowing what's behind the lyrics and being able to play to the lyrics and leave space where you need to and stuff is so important.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You said something on a podcast that I listened to recently, an educational podcast, and you said, it's a mantra that you said. It was not criticism. What did you say?
Contradiction is
Contradiction.
expensive. Contradiction is expensive.
Yeah. And I love that in so many ways because at first I was like, okay, that sounds right. What does that mean? And then I was like, oh, okay, so contradiction as opposed to criticism, but those are, as you had pointed out, kind of the same thing. Like you're redirecting when you contradict.
I think that's it. It's a redirecting of whatever momentum the other person has going. And that's not always bad. Like we have to do that sometimes. But it does cost you something. I don't think people enjoy being redirected very much. Unless it's done just incredibly delicately and the path is so open and so obvious to you that it's better. But that's just something that served me well in terms of picking battles. And I also just know it about myself. I know that I don't like to get corrected all the time. But us being side musicians, support musicians, no matter how much mojo we're bringing, at the end of the day, we need to take these criticisms, these critiques, these contradictions. Yeah. If we can minimize the need for them, that's the best. If you can show up so prepared that there isn't any need for it, that's sort of ideal, I guess. Or if you can somehow figure out what this artist, this band leader, this producer really wants.
Right.
Either right then and there or ahead of time or whatever, or just by pure luck sometimes. I don't know. I find it interesting because I tried not to ask too many things of people. Like, okay, let me start over. I think that what that means, contradiction is expensive in terms of guiding my own behavior, is just not saving it for when it really matters with people.
Right.
Not trying to correct people too often. Like I'm more inclined to just say, oh yeah, tell me more about that. Like, and I can have my own opinion, certainly.
Sure.
But it doesn't always need to be pursued.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, and I imagine too, like working with kids or anyone else, like it's so much more helpful to kind of find where they're coming from, when they're like, if they're thinking a certain way, like you've got to be able to navigate that. So you kind of meet them where they are, see where they're headed, and then maybe a slight redirection here and there can do a lot more good than kind of bringing the hammer down or whatever.
That's right.
For change.
I mean, being a math teacher, you have to be doing this all the time. Like, no, you should do this, you should do that. Here's what we should do. So, of course, the way in which we present that argument is really important. And just creating a feeling that this is not. I'm not out to get you in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
I don't have any problem with you. I think you're actually awesome.
Right.
I've done this a lot before, and I've observed that this works really well. Here, why don't you give it a try?
Right.
Then it's not really contradiction anymore. Like,
Right.
As a teacher, that kind of thing really works well in terms of the persuasive aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in working with other creative people, we're all pretty sensitive. We all get our buttons pushed easily.
Right.
And it's unpredictable with other people what that's going to be.
Yeah. And there's some duality there that I've kind of been exploring too. One of the ideas is that as the drummer, you almost feel like middle management in a lot of ways, right? Like you're kind of once you're on stage, like you are really in charge. Like you can lift up the music or you can crash and burn it. You have the power.
Yes.
And so it takes a lot of trust, right? For other folks that are maybe writing the music, composing it, whatever, and they're handing it to you and they're saying, this is what we need.
Yes.
And then you're pretty much like telling that to the rest of the band, like, this is the vibe. This is your canvas.
Yes.
Stick, and so art in general is some form of communication, right? There, and so in communication, there has to be a sounding board. There has to be someone has to receive it. And with that is going to be feedback. And so in some ways, like we don't all seek it out specifically in that way, but at the same time, you're looking to make an impact and we all want to be understood. And so the only way we can know that is with that feedback. And so why so many art schools like have criticism as a whole unit oftentimes, right?
Yeah.
And it's painful and all that kind of stuff. But like how in drumming specifically, I feel like it is so... I've played other instruments, but I feel like it's so much harder to hear. And so I don't know. What do you think?
That's very interesting. I think part of it maybe comes from the fact that people have a hard time explaining what exactly they want from the drums.
Yeah.
Or what precisely is maybe not right about a situation. And then for lack of a good way to explain it, we will grab a little bit like rougher descriptors, like this needs to be more on top, or this needs to be this or that, or it'll be some sort of tempo thing that maybe doesn't really exist, because it's really something else. It's really some textural thing or some just certain little lilt that it's supposed to have that's so hard to explain. And that does sting because it's part of that sting, I think, comes from the feeling of, I wish I knew what you wanted right now.
It's that communication piece.
It's not that, like, part of it is like, oh, I wish I could have read their mind. Mm-hmm. I wish I could have immediately known without anybody telling me. Yes, there is a little bit of that as just as a, like, professional pride. But there's also just that feeling of, like, what do they want? Where do and sometimes just finding a couple simple references. That's all you need.
Right.
Like you discover, this person grew up listening to this artist or this record, and then you spend a little time with that, and you that's what they're talking about. Okay. And hopefully you can hang in there long enough to suss that out.
Yeah. Yeah, and oftentimes it feels like you're running the race too, right? Like it's so physical. So and your whole brain is fired, and so then you end up in this fight or flight stage, like trying to survive, and someone's like, "No, this is wrong," and then it's like you died. That's what it feels like. And it's funny because I recognized it at one point when I like made a mistake on stage, and I just felt it out in the crowd, or like there was something was going on with the mix, and you could just see, through the lights and everything. It was like there was some confusion that was happening, and then we all, kind of came back around. But it was like, where did it go wrong? I assume it was my mistake, but anyway, yeah, it's just funny how it's so instantaneous. Like, I guess the redirection when you're in the midst of it, like really trying to drive home the idea, it is so much harder.
Yeah. And sometimes the redirect, the best kind of redirect is when there's a musical cue rather than, hey, we got to talk about this. Mm-hmm. Like if I just hear a thing going on and then all of a sudden then it's like, oh, that's where that pocket should be or something, Right. Sometimes that doesn't read as a redirect or a contradiction. It's just a cue. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Sure.
That's the kind of feedback I like. Like I like when it's something that the player can figure out on their own.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
rather than, hey, we got to talk, like
Right.
have a seat,
Right.
or like a long email with notes about this song, this song, this song, that kind of thing.
Sure.
But of course, that's part of the game too.
Yeah.
Especially when we're first learning a body of work,
Yeah. There was something, I keep coming back to this, but this dual nature of like the professions that you've had, and clearly like there's been a season for you for each one at different points. But it's clear, it seems obvious to me, and I think anyone that's listened to your other podcasts or read some about you or listened to you, like you're enthusiastic about both.
Yes.
And I think so oftentimes, like for me, just bringing it back to my own experience, it was very much like this or that kind of a thing, right? Or you do this artistic, creative endeavor and you have a backup plan. And maybe it's different now, but I just find it fascinating to kind of have that dual, interest and to carry them both along at the same time. It seems like it would be so helpful for a lot of folks to kind of consider that, like have two parts that can actually kind of support each other.
Yes, I agree. I think a lot of people have multiple things going on. I mean, even big entertainers will have, a tequila brand
Right.
or a clothesline or something in addition to their music thing. I think that's becoming more and more common, especially as the business is a little stranger. I was definitely raised with the backup plan mindset.
Right.
I think that's part of why I was doing the pre-med thing, which I kind of put my parents at ease. Like I think deep down I was really, I probably maybe knew that I was going to still do the music thing.
Right.
But this was just a way to kind of earn a degree, earn my freedom, get really good grades, like impress the powers that be.
Right.
I didn't really see the teaching thing ahead of me. That was a surprise. But then it ended up being something I really loved, and like getting more engaged with math, getting better at it, better at teaching it, and just seeing the impact that it has with people, like boosting their confidence. Like that was very rewarding, and it's good business. I was able to do it at a time that I wasn't always getting a lot of gigs, or maybe I was doing some really cool gigs, but they just didn't pay that much. So it was good in that way. Having relatively flexible hours as a tutor or like a private instructor helps. And yeah, you got to love it and work at it. I mean, I would woodshed math the same way I woodshedded drums. I remember I was in my studio practicing drums one day and I was thinking like, why aren't I doing this with math too?
Right.
At that time, my goal was to teach calculus. I'd never taught a calculus class before at that time. So I was like, okay, I'm going to just woodshed that too. So I just basically worked through it all again. And then within a couple of years, sure enough, I was teaching calc. It was great, So I think that's part of it too, is that you can't think of it as a side hustle. You can't, or you can't think of it as something that's lesser or more. This is just stuff you do. Stuff you do well.
Right.
Like really well.
Yeah.
You service these clients the same as we service these other clients. And I know that sounds cynical, but think of how much energy we put into our bandmates. That ought to correspond to the energy we put into other work too, hopefully, if it's rewarding. If you're doing something really menial, maybe that's not necessary, but I think it's worth it.
Yeah.
I'm much happier.
Yeah. You had talked before about kind of the revelatory moment that students have, or kind of like, this kind of, and the celebration that comes with it, right? And how important that is.
Yeah.
I find in my own practice of drumming that sometimes the skills sneak up on you. Like it feels like you just shed and shed and shed and shed, and you feel like you're never going to get it. And then maybe you come back to it and you're like, oh, I have it. But then it feels like that celebration is gone. I don't know. Like, how do you experience it?
Oh, that's fascinating. That's a complicated question for me, because I think like that satisfaction, that celebration can happen on so many dimensions. It can be just us by ourselves, pure joy of just loving the craft, and now I get it.
Sure.
Or it could be getting some gig that requires it.
Right.
Getting on some stage with some person who's a great practitioner of that.
Right.
And
I just kind of want to drive it home for the listeners too,
Please.
because, and I'll link to the other podcast and everything, because it's good whether or not you're a teacher. But, with kids, as you were saying, or maybe I should let you talk about like the importance of that as you're teaching math to kids.
Yeah, I part of that comes from the fact that there's so much negative emotion and concepts surrounding math and learning math. I think you ask really anybody off the street, or if you did a survey, you'd get an unbelievably high percentage of people with really negative feelings about math. They'd say they hate it, they're bad at it. I think it's a real problem in our culture. I honestly felt like as a teacher, that was part of what I was trying to push back against, because I don't think it's accurate. I think math is part of what makes us human. I think we're all using it, whether we identify it or not as math, because there's so many qualitative aspects of math that are not numerical at all, and we all use them all the time. Not to mention loving the technology that we use every day that depends on it. But then we ridicule the process of learning math. We act like it's totally pointless. Math teachers are mean, and some of them are. Some of them are really burnt out and not so nice to their kids, Fair enough. So the celebratory element was something that I felt like I was lucky as a musician. I could bring it in a credible way. I could say, number one, you can trust what I'm saying because I'm a rock and roller. I'm supposed to be the anti-authority guy. I'm going to go play drums later, and I would never tell you to do something that's a waste of time, number one. So if I tell you to do it, you can believe me. Right. And number two, when you get it right, be stoked about it, pat yourself on the back, because that's the way to gradually undo that culture of I can't do it.
Yeah.
The more celebratory we are, the more times we get that little emotional payoff, the more confident we are when ultimately in the moment when we really need it.
Right.
And even if you don't know what to do right away, I tell my students all the time, I don't really know what to do right away. Let's take a look at it. Right. Same thing with music. Like I got to learn this song. Do I already know it? No. I got to find some way to learn it. Okay, I can do that. So that was, I felt like I could, I do feel like I can use that in a way that's persuasive, because it is tangible in music. That's something people can get their head around. And in sports, I've connected it in sports, like athletes who will, pump their fist after like an amazing shot or something. And there is something self-reinforcing about that. And so I felt like getting some of that element into the math classroom, and it's amazing how well that works. Yeah. How much especially over time, like we talked about before, if you can spread it out over the period of weeks and build that culture of confidence and happiness around it, which I know sounds kooky to talk about math that way, but it's just the way I operate.
I mean, it sounds like the perfect kind of antidote, though, right? If there's so much pain, because there is just a lot of pain surrounding math.
Sure. And you can make light of the tedious elements. It's not like it's never dry. No matter how interesting the subject, there's parts that are tedious. There just are. But then you just say, oh yeah, this is kind of the annoying part, and then we'll get through this, and then, oh wow, how cool.
Right. Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this has been a great talk.
It has.
I appreciate it so much. I mean, I feel like I've learned so much because, in so many ways, I feel like we've kind of we've got a lot of similarities. For me, there's always been kind of, a liminal space for like how much of my life is going to be this and how much of it is going to be this. And so that's a lot of what I've been exploring over this past year as I've been on hiatus from medicine. And so, but it's, I think it's great to be able to look at things like a season, and you don't have to just go through just always pushing one button every time. And so when the passion is there, though, like that's when you can give it your all for it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So I was really glad to meet you, and thanks again for coming on.
Thank you, Joel.
Yeah.
It's been great talking with you. Thanks.
Yeah, cool.
So that was me and Jamie Douglas. I really got so much out of it in the way that he talks to his students, and I think that can really be a good model for the way that we also talk to ourselves, the way we celebrate when we achieve something, also the concepts of redirection, and how we have to keep in mind how when we redirect others, it costs something. It's still possible, but it's something that we need to be mindful of, in choosing those redirections. So really, really engaging guy and a talented drummer. I would recommend you check out anything that he's involved with. But don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, follow. Let me know what you think about these shows. And feel free to provide any suggestions or, anything that you'd like to see more of. But otherwise, I'll see you for the next one.